Holla ballers, it's Preacher, and it's another mailbox. Let's crack on. I love it when you guys send me these questions. I do like to nerd out about WoW. What a great place to do it. I got a question, is that as much as I'm hyped about Warlords of Draenor, this came from Chris, I have the big problem is that I'm going to school when Warlords of Draenor probably launches next year, which means I won't be able to raid. I've been in one of the top guilds in the world for a very long time now and decided to try and find a guild that suits better my needs, something that raids much less. But I'm worried about the lack of progression. I'm used to a certain raiding environment. What do you think will happen? Well, you come to the right place because I did this. I stepped back from the world first race and joined a guild that was going slower. As simple as that. That was the decision I made. It's like, I'm done with the world first race. I'm done with that level of commitment. I don't want to do it anymore. It takes up a vast amount of time, even though it's a short amount of time. A lot of people get confused that the hardcore raiders raid more than anyone else. They actually raid less, is what you should know, but they have that period of progression, and the unknown was actually a problem for me. If I could guarantee, which you guys will probably relate to if you're in the top world guilds, that progression would be over within, say, a month, 2 weeks, something like that, then I could kind of commit to that. Even now, I could kind of say, you know what, for the next 2 weeks, I'm just going to be sat here in my pizza box and underwear, and I'm going to be rocking the world. But then you get certain tiers that are broken, imbalanced, broken boss, something like that, and progression just never stops. Because the problem is, you don't know if the boss is broken or you're doing it wrong, and it feels there's certain points during very end game progression when a boss hasn't died, and I appreciate that so few of you can probably relate to this, where you're actually stood in front of a boss that hasn't died yet. You can't actually confirm that this boss is killable, and there's an event that happens during that encounter, or a point you get to, and it's just like, how the fuck do we deal with this? And you might have to do 100, 200 wipes, and you're still at this point. The progress has come to a complete stop. And not only that, you're surrounded by some of the best players in the world, and you're still not getting past this point. Some very famous examples of things like Alone in the Darkness, considered unkillable by essentially all of North America and all of EU, but it was of course Taiwan or Chinese Stars was the guild who actually said, you know what we could do here is we can abuse warlocks. We can abuse warlocks in a very heavy way. We have access, I think they used something like 8 warlocks or 6 warlocks in their first kill, and we could get this done. Nefarian Heroic was actually very similar until Paragon pulled out, what, 15 feral druids, something like that, and was like, okay, we can abuse feral druids very heavily here due to the combination and the synergy between the buff and rip. And then we can actually do no damage until we get the buff, and then everybody drops a big 5-point rip, and suddenly the boss dies. Very many encounters are like that. It happens, and the feeling amongst the raiders is this just isn't doable. We just can't seem to get this boss down. That was the bit that I was like worried about, because it happens on a reasonably regular basis. When it comes to the top end raiders, you're fighting in gear that is well below what's sort of the expected standard or the designed standard that this boss should die to. And you're struggling. You're really, really fucking struggling. So when you take a step away from that and you say, you know what, I still want to raid. I love raiding. I really like it. So I need to find something that better suits my actual lifestyle. Then I need to look to a guild that is less progressed. As simple as that. That's going to take slower times. I can afford to not raid every day. The raid times are usually like set in stone. So even if we're close to a kill, we're probably going to knock off at the same time every night. I can kind of guarantee nights out with friends. I can guarantee with my own relaxation time, spend time with my wife, whatever it might be. And therefore, I'm going to have a more comfortable time with that. I've got to tell you, it's so fucking hard, dude. It really is awfully. In fact, I would imagine any step backwards in raiding progression for anybody who's moved up to higher tiers, moving just a few places down the list feels like you just added a camel to your shoulders. It really does, and it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating. It was a hard time stepping back down to... I stepped down to a guild that was like World 40th. That was where I stepped to. World 40th. That is no slouch of a guild. My God, no slouch of a guild. And it was awful. Absolutely awful for at least 3 months. But I went into it with the mindset as this is what it's going to be like. They're going to be slackier. They're not going to take bosses as serious. And more importantly, which is kind of a big deal, is raid DPS is going to be lower. And that's a bigger deal than you could possibly imagine. The higher up you go, you tend to find things like trash melts. it melts and it's not even a thing. People want to be out of that dungeon as fast as humanly fucking possible because I want to get back to doing the things I really enjoy. Farm raiding fucking sucks. I want the gear and I want to get out there as quickly as possible. And you're generally playing with people who are competing en masse for world first rankings, which means they are not fucking around when it comes to doing damage, and bosses die hilariously quickly. It's almost embarrassing sometimes how quickly a boss of this like heroic boss, and you'll hear that a guild is really struggling on this boss, but when you get there, it literally just fucking falls to the ground and you're like, this is what I want to be like. And nobody is saying that in the top end guilds people don't wipe to the stupidest shit. They don't wipe to the stupidest shit. Of course they do. But it's the overall environment that tends to be much quicker. Well, as soon as a boss dies, the entire raid is already going to the next boss. The tanks have already pulled the trash before you don't stop and drink. Unless it's like a first kill, you don't have the healers stopping and drinking. They're already running off. They're maintaining hots on the tank because they know those tanks are impatient. The best tanks in the world are really impatient. They don't give a fuck. They want to get going, because that's how they play. They want to get it pulled. They want to get aggro as soon as possible because they're competing with world first DPS at the end of the day. And they're used to it. That's their environment. Their environment is they don't push it to the fucking limit. They're going to have problems. Yeah? They're going to have to get in there. They're going to have to maybe taunt something, which is a fucking nightmare at endgame tanking. I don't want to do that. They might have DPSs who just don't give a fuck, and they're just going to start pulling because they have combustion off cooldown, and I've got pyros ready to go, so I'm firing that motherfucker because they expect the tanks to pull. This synergy goes on. You call it ninja pulling. At the top end game, that's just called the environment. I'm ready to go. I'm pumped. I'm psyched. Let's fucking keep going. Let's keep going because I want to clear this dungeon that usually takes a guild 4 days in an hour. Yeah? Because tomorrow is alt raid. I also want to do that in an hour and a half. All this kind of stuff needs to take place. I want to get this done, grab the items, because that's all we're here for is just to get the drops off the guys, and then get out of here. I'm not excited about doing this boss, because we've done this boss. And we tend to do this boss more than anybody else in the world. Look at how many kills of Garish Hellscream heroic guilds like Paragon and Method have. They're in the 30s or 40s or something by now. And other guilds are like, oh, we're still trying to get there. Right? There's a huge difference. When you step back, you find things like there's a lot more chit-chat. There's a waiting period between, like, killing the last trash pack and then going into the boss. All this kind of stuff is going on. It's like standing around. There's summons. There's guys who are just now logging on. It's an absolute pain in the ass. You have to go into it with the mindset that you accept that is what it's going to be like. There are going to be more silly mistakes. There are going to be 1 or 2 members of that guild who... You're baffled as to why they're in the guild. You're absolutely mind-numbingly baffled as to why they're in the guild because they fail at everything all the time. But they have a bit of a funny personality. It's something you're just not used to because they would just be kicked. I don't care how hilarious you are, you're not going to last if you fail on basic mechanics at the top end. And as the more you move down that, the more people are allowed to get away with stuff because it's kind of funny. We kind of expect to wipe. We walk up to a boss that you generally would expect to kill so easily, and we expect 2 or 3 wipes with this guild. You have to get into that mindset that that's how it is. After you've tasted the environment where that's not the case and it's charged through, smash things to pieces, get the fuck out of there, and now it's a more, well, we've got, 3 or 4 days to kill this, to clear this raid. Yeah, we've done it before, but we're going to take our time. We'll do things tomorrow. Big problem I always had is the raid would be, let's say I was raiding, let me think, Twilight Citadel, and we had cleared it, we killed Sinestra and whatever. And we would kill Cho'Gall, and there's an hour left of the raid or something like that. And the guys would be like, you know what, let's call it, because we've got a raid night tomorrow. We can do Sinestra tomorrow because Johnny needs to log on, and he needs the necklace or he needs the trinket from Sinestra. So we'll just wait for him. And everyone's like, okay. Whereas I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? If you need an item from me, you should fucking be here. Otherwise, what's the fucking point? I have an hour left here, and that means I don't have to raid tomorrow. And it seems really odd as somebody who's really into raiding, but if I can put an extra hour or even 2 hours into making sure I don't have to raid tomorrow, I kind of prefer that. Because that means I have my whole next evening free. And more guilds are preferring to, like, well, we've reached the time limit. And I get that. People, especially when I used to play with Kill Count Lost in the Burning Crusade, a lot of those guys raided from net cafes. So what we would have is, the net cafe's closing. We have to stop the raid. Oh. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but as I moved further into the game, that really started to wind me up. It's because we just don't have that environment here in the UK, and we're close to a kill. I remember we worked very hard on the Eredar twins, and we would get to, like, well, that fight was over if you survived the first twin with most of your raid alive. And we would be very close, like 10% on the first boss, and we were almost going to get to it. But then it'd be like, yeah, the Net Cafe's closing. Okay, we'll start again tomorrow. I'm like, no, this is the raid that can do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. It's super difficult to go backwards in terms of your progression curve and actually stay there. Sometimes we have to do it temporarily for whatever reason. We come back to the game. But if you've not taken a break from raiding and then you've decided to move to a guild that moves slower, it's really, really hard. It's so hard, dude. I understand your point of view. I just tell you this. Accept that's the way it's going to be. When you go in there, try and control your frustration, but you will be frustrated. You absolutely will be frustrated. You're going to be. It's just inevitable. You're going to feel it because you're just not used to it. It's going to take you... It took me about 4 months. I remember in Darkstorm, when in Blubzor joined the guild, and he asked me what it was like. I was like, dude, you know, these guys, they like a talk. Trash can take a little while. There's a lot of AFK. There's things you're just not going to be used to because he was used to my raid leadership style. My raid leadership style was super efficient, no wasting time. There was rules and punishments for people who wouldn't be ready to go within the next few seconds after a farm boss died. And so I told him, you know, you better be prepared for that. And ultimately he got used to it and it's fine. That's my level of raiding I'm comfortable with. I'll get used to it. You will eventually get used to it, is all I can tell you. You will get used to it, but there's going to be a period of time there where you're going to think, I just fuck this game. This isn't how I want to play. This isn't what I'm used to. But you will get used to it, and I end up having an absolute blast in those guilds, so it's fine. All right, bye.